Good evening, everyone. I'm Amanda Burgess, editor of JourneyWoman and your host of Solo Travel Wisdom. On tonight's episode, we're taking a deep dive into an activity that 68% of you told us is on your radar in a recent survey, hiking and walking. To give you the scoop on how you can up your hiking game, we assembled an all-women panel of experts who between them have hiked most of North America and a good chunk of the world. I'll introduce you to them in a moment, but first a quick note on how tonight will run. On Zoom, post your questions in the chat or use the raise your hand feature whenever you think of them, and we'll address them as we go along. There's also going to be time for an open Q&A at the end of the show. Don't be shy, there are no silly questions, and we welcome all of them. With that, let's get into it, shall we? With me on the show tonight are Lisa Ballard, Emmy-winning TV producer and host, writer, and champion skier. Her articles about her outdoor adventures have appeared in hundreds of magazines and websites, and she has authored 8 guidebooks on hiking. Welcome, Lisa.
Thanks, Amanda.
Experienced branch of Parks Canada's national office, leading a team that develops tools and policies to support parks and historic sites in all aspects of camping and where she loves the endless opportunities for hiking, biking, paddling, and exploring the natural wonders of the park. Welcome, Jennifer.
Thank you.
Ericka Pilcher is a regional manager for the National Park Service's Rivers, Trails, and Conservation Assistance Program, working to design trails and parks, conserve and improve access to rivers, protect special places, and create recreation opportunities. She lives in Colorado and spends her free time on road trips in the great outdoors with her family. Welcome, Ericka.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Sonya Richmond is an avid birder who holds a PhD in forestry and completed her postdoctoral research at Bird Studies Canada. In 2019, she sold her house, donated her possessions, and embarked on a 4-year mission to hike the Great Trail across Canada from coast to coast. That's more than 27,000 kilometers, by the way. Welcome, Sonya.
Thank you very much. It's very exciting to be here.
Amazing. Lindsay Briscoe is a project manager and architect with the National Park Service who once took a career hiatus to hike the Appalachian Trail, following that up by conquering the Pacific Crest Trail and the Continental Divide Trail. The 3 hikes gave her a combined 7,900 miles of backcountry experience. Welcome, Lindsay.
Glad to be here.
I want to thank the entire panel for spending the hour with us tonight. There's a ton of experience with us on screen, and I know each of you have a wealth of wisdom and insight to share with our audience. So with that, let's dive in. So Lisa, tell me your favorite quote about travel or hiking and what it means to you.
So I thought a lot about this, and it's really from a poem by Robert Frost, and it's a quote to live by, to be really honest. It kind of defines my life. So you've probably heard the poem. It's called The Road Not Taken. And the last stanza of it says, 2 roads diverged in a wood, and I took the one less traveled by, and that has made all the difference.
Thank you, Lisa. Jennifer.
Well, I wish I had chosen that one. That's one that crossed my mind because it's certainly one of my favorites. Yes, I guess I had a quick look at Edward Abbey. He's somebody I've read a lot of, and I enjoy his writing. And so he's got, I'll give you the condensed one because he's got some rather long ones, but it was about, he uses the word man. We could substitute that with person or woman, but a person on foot, on horseback, or on a bicycle will see more, feel more, endure more in 1 mile than the motorized tourist can in 100 miles. That resonates with me.
I love that. Ericka. Ericka?
Yeah, sorry, I had myself on mute, of course. The one that I chose was by Joseph Campbell, and it really is kind of about finding your right path in life. So I felt like it was connected to, getting out there and actually being on the trails or being on the path of life. And it's follow your bliss. If you do follow your bliss, you put yourself on the kind of track that has been there all the while waiting for you. And the life that you ought to be living is the one that you are living. And when you can see that, you begin to meet people who are in your field of bliss that open doors to you. So I say, follow your bliss and don't be afraid. The doors will open where you didn't know they were going to be. If you follow your bliss, doors will open for you that wouldn't have opened for anyone else.
Love that. Hikers certainly follow their bliss in the wilderness. Lindsay.
Yes, so I went with a part of a poem as well. And actually this poem is something that, or the part of it is something I've written in the trail journals, usually at the start of a hike, a short hike or a long hike. But considering the 3 long hikes I've done, there's a trail journal at the start and at the end. And at the start, I always write the same thing. And it's this excerpt from Little Gidding, which is a poem by T.S. Eliot. And it goes, "We shall not cease from exploration. And at the end of all our exploring will be to arrive where we started and know the place for the first time." And whether it's on a long hike or even just a short day hike, some sort of loop, in this poem, T.S. Eliot reminds me about growing and evolving as a human.
Love it. So I want to know what kind of hikers you all are. There's day hikers, through hikers, people that go slow and steady, people that chase thrills and climb dangerous mountains. I want to know what type of hikers each of you are. Lisa.
So I'm a little of 2 of them. I'm definitely a day hiker. I mean, I like nothing better than just to get out on the trail and air it out for the day and get away. But there is a bit of the thrill chaser in me. I've done a lot of hiking and trekking around the world. And like I said in the poem, the road less taken, I tend to veer towards things that are a little bit off the beaten path and maybe a little riskier, depending on where I am in the world.
Okay, well, we have a lot of adventurous women in our community, so I'm sure that's going to resonate with them. Jennifer.
Yeah, that's a hard one because I pretty much, I would say I cover the spectrum. I do a lot of, where I live, I'm surrounded by 300 kilometers of trails I can access out my door. So I spend part of my day almost every day just walking, hiking. And then every opportunity I have, I'll go for longer multi-day trips and that kind of thing. And I also like to do some scrambles. So a couple times a year, I'll make sure I get up high and work a little harder. So I probably sort of cross the spectrum.
Well-rounded hiker. Amazing.
Yeah.
I would say that I am slow and steady. I like to, in the times that I have done solo backpacking, I kind of like to pack everything that I would possibly ever need, including, the chocolate and the French press and just everything you would need. So if you want a hiking partner, come with me because I like to carry a lot of belongings with me and go very slow.
A lot of women in our audience actually are looking for a partner that will go slow and steady because they have some injuries and don't want to slow that partner down. Okay.
Fine.
Amazing. Sonya.
I guess I'm a little bit of everything, but I really do like through hiking. I guess that's obvious if I pick a trail that's going to take me 4 years to do or maybe longer. But when I'm not doing a through hike, I've hiked in Europe as well as Canada, and I absolutely love through hiking. But when I'm not doing that, I also like just taking shorter hikes, even just going for daily walks in the green spaces around my own neighborhood. I find that when you go outside, you almost never see the same thing twice. So if ever there's any opportunity to get out and hike, I'll probably take you up on it.
That's an amazing point to make because so many people think if they just walk places, they're not hikers, but hiking is walking.
Yeah.
Lindsay.
I think, I would say I'm all 4 of these styles and sometimes simultaneously. I love through hiking, and that's always, will be a passion of mine, but I like to think of a through hike as just a series of day hikes or a series of short backpacking trips. And on a through hike, I'm definitely slow and steady, and there's some moments, whether I like it or not, that I'm going to be a thrill chaser because I have to get through a section of trail. So I think it really depends on the day of the week, the time of year, and my mental state, depending on what hiking style I'm going to be in.
And all seasons, all places, all reasons hiker. Amazing. Well, maybe not the winter where you are. So my next question is, I want to know what the biggest lessons that hiking has taught you. You all have decades of experience. Lisa.
The biggest lesson that I've learned is probably to be self-sufficient and self-confident. They kind of go together. I've spent a lot of time in the woods by myself because I write hiking guidebooks. And as much as I can, I try to invite people to come with me, but you got to get the mileage in, you got to get the hikes in. And sometimes people aren't available, friends aren't available. And so I've learned to become self-sufficient. And at first I was quite nervous about that. But the more I was on the trail and the more I hiked, and it just, I became more self-confident, and that's really it gone into the rest of my life as well. I really rely on what I've learned on the trail to get me through the rest of what I do. And that self-confidence piece is directly related to that self-sufficiency part.
Independence, a very important thing. Thank you, Lisa. Jennifer.
Yeah, I like that one. And maybe sort of along the same theme or related would be to make sure that you can do your own route finding, and that you're that's sort of that independence piece. I've learned that the hard way through the years, when I sort of just, oh yeah, I'm going to join somebody, and I'm just a tag along, and clearly they know where they're going and what we're doing, and it doesn't always pan out. So now I'm really make sure that if you're on your own or with a group, you take responsibility for your own route finding. You know the plan, you know where you're going, you have maps, studied up if required, and that's sort of for more adventurous type hiking, that you can actually intelligently contribute to route finding and the navigation.
Absolutely, and so important, your hiking partner who knows where to go and gets hurt.
Yeah.
Ericka.
Similar to Jennifer, actually, mine was going to be perseverance, but also, planning ahead and being prepared. And I think that one thing that hiking has taught me is to question my assumptions, and to, really ask myself sometimes if the story that I'm telling myself is true, or if the fears that I'm thinking about are real or perceived. And so I think that really comes into play when you're in the wilderness, in the backcountry alone, of just kind of working through that, really working through some of those fears and persevering, and kind of coming out on the other side feeling stronger for it.
Amazing, thank you. Sonya.
I guess one of the things I've learned on the trail is to accept rather than expect. So this applies to real life as well. But I mean, if you're long distance hiking and you're tired, you're smelly, you're hungry, and you have your heart set on there being a warm shower or a hot meal at the end of the day, and that doesn't happen, or even if you're on a shorter hike and you really want nice weather to see a certain view or something, and for whatever reason, something doesn't happen the way you expected it to, especially when you're really tired, it can just ruin your whole day. You can get so frustrated and so disappointed that you just the whole trip is kind of, it's done. You're through with it. But I found on the trail, often when something doesn't work out the way you think it's going to, something else really good will happen right after that. And actually your experience can sometimes be better than what you were hoping for. But you need to just stay open enough, stay positive enough where you can, see the good thing and accept it and enjoy it when it comes along. So that's one of the things that, I've learned, I guess, mostly on the through hikes, but in real life as well.
Absolutely. Surrender and acceptance, very important when you're dealing with nature. It's volatile. Lindsay.
Well, I just want to say all these resonate with me so much. So yeah, thank you. Some of the biggest lessons I think I've learned are freedom, love, and gratitude are the big three that come to mind. I think when when I'm out on trail and I haven't been out there in a long time, maybe it's the beginning of a through hike, I think any new hiker notices the physical pain of walking. And whether that's from a heavy pack or long miles or elevation that you're doing, during the first part of my journey, usually my head is just filled with signals from my foot pain and blisters and parts of my body that hurt I didn't even know could hurt. But eventually, though, that pain wears away because as the body works itself into shape, And there's a tremendous self, I think, of physical freedom when that happens. And, while that's a great thing, that pain starts to drop away. That's when I begin to realize that the brain is no longer focused on pain, but mental chatter, kind of starts to come up, and the volume of mental chatter is increased. And one of the most amazing yet frustrating things about being on trail sometimes is the lack of cell phone service. So typically if mental chatter comes up here, I get on technology and I can suppress it and silence it and move on to something else. But on the trail, that's just not so. And so because of that, I've had a lot of long conversations, and there's a lot of space with many tough conversations that I'm having with myself over miles and miles, where I'm walking in silence. And from that, I've gained a deeper sense of self-love. So that's where the love really comes about. And I think then, as the mental voices decrease sometimes, what I've come into is that spiritual side of hiking. And I've heard people talk about a state of flow if they're, being creative or making or, playing music. And I do think the same is possible from hiking because I've experienced it. I think there's a time and a presence to each moment, and there's that deep understanding that gives me gratitude for the place that I'm in that surrounds me. And I think the greatest part of all these lessons, though, is that I never know when the next one's going to come. Sometimes it is the picturesque mountaintop where you're looking off into the sunset, but more often than not, it's a rainy day in the woods with no view when you're hungry and you're tired. And that's when the next lesson comes. And because I know what I've learned in the past and what I hope to learn for the future, but not knowing when the next one is going to come, that's why I continue hiking.
Amazing. Being alone with yourself without distraction is so important, and you definitely learn a lot about yourself. Thank you for that, Lindsay. So my next question is, hikers need to be, of all levels, need to be concerned with safety before they step onto the trail and then while they're walking the trail. I want to know from each of you what your top safety tips are for hikers. Lisa.
So there's a lot of parts to this one. I think most people know what to put in their pack, bring layers and that sort of thing. That's, pretty self-explanatory. So I guess my top three would be, number one, I always tell somebody at home where I'm going to hike, and my plan for the day, and I stick to it. And especially if I'm going by myself, I feel like that's probably the number one thing you can do, because if something happens, at least there's a backup plan and somebody will miss you. And so I can't emphasize enough the make a plan and stick to it, and make sure somebody who is still at home. And sometimes I might be like in the Adirondacks and my husband is home in Montana or somewhere else. I could be somewhere else in the world, but I still let him know where I am, and typically somebody else that's closer, but that way somebody will miss me at the end of the day. So that's a biggie. The second thing I really pay attention to is my feet. I take really good care of my feet. I make sure my footwear is comfortable. I've got appropriate socks. I'm a big fan of Gore-Tex in my hiking boots, because I feel like if your feet get wet, they just won't dry, and it's really miserable, and it can get blisters. And so if your feet are hurting, you can't walk. So I really pay attention to them. And then the last thing, which is my little hang up, is I'm a little bit scared of the dark, and you never know when a hike might take longer than you think. And especially if it's later in the fall where there's not a lot of daylight. And so I always have a headlamp with me, and that's just one of my little things, because you just never know. And I don't want to be stuck out there and not be able to see where I'm going.
And along with telling somebody where you're going, it must be really important to stick to the route that you told them you were going on too.
Totally. Yeah, that's part of it, is sticking to your plan, because it doesn't do you any good if you decide once you're out there that, hey, I think I'll go over and see that lake over there that I really hadn't thought I would see, and then something happens, you sprain an ankle or break a leg or whatever, and then no one knows where you are. So for sure, make your plan, let someone know, and stick to it.
Amazing. Thank you. Jennifer.
Yeah. So take care of your feet was my first one too. And I think it's, it's the essential thing, start with your feet. So I don't, you've already covered that nicely, Lisa, I'll move on. But a good one. I would say the next one for me anyway is I always sort of build in a bit of redundancy. So I am most definitely not an ultralight hiker. I respect those who are, but I'm not one of them. I have a lot of stuff in my pack. I like to work hard. But it's that idea of an extra layer, an extra granola bar, maybe some water tablets, an emergency blanket. I tend to have a lot of stuff, and it's so often that's come in handy, not always so much for myself, but for somebody else, somebody else in your party that doesn't have things, or you encounter somebody who's having a tough day or who needs something. And it's pretty nice to be the person that can, whip out the extra. In fact, this happened the other day. It was an extra pole. We happened to had a pole, which is kind of another story. And boom, we could set this person up, and that was for a ski, and they went off and completed their ski. So it's that idea of having a bit of redundancy for yourself or for others. Yeah, and I think I've covered the other piece, that it's similar to that piece about planning too, making.
And what kind of socks do you think you should wear? I know Lisa covered footwear. I don't know if you plan to cover what kind of socks that you should wear when you're hiking.
Me personally, no, I hadn't. I think it's that idea of test out what works well for you, right? I'm not a Gore-Tex sock person myself, but I'm sure in some places that's the solution. I have a system that works really well for me, and it's just kind of darn tough socks. That's what I use, and they've always worked well for me. And a good boot, and keep your feet dry, obviously. And I think it's a lot of it is getting the right boot before you head off on a long hike. And then again, pretty straightforward, but you'd probably be surprised how many people buy a new pair of boots and then they're going to do a 3-day backpacking trip, and that's not to be recommended. It's quite a roll of the dice.
Break in your boots and test your socks.
Yeah.
Yes, Lisa.
Yeah, just a quickie. So when I talk about Gore-Tex, I refer to my boot having a Gore-Tex liner, not the sock actually. And I'm of the same mind. For a sock, I typically just use a wool sock or a wool blended sock. They perform better. They wick well. You can switch at the top or at the end point when you're turning around to go back, to switch your socks, and then it's almost like putting a fresh pair on. And and a lot of times at the top of a mountain, I'll just air my feet out, take my boots off, and let my socks air out. And then when I put them back on, everything feels great to go down.
Amazing, good tip. Thank you, Ericka.
I would agree with everything that you all have said about socks, at least. Yeah, you can definitely just continually rotate those socks. And yeah, if you want to stop and air your feet out and put a fresh pair on, just keep rotating them on those longer hikes. Definitely wool socks. And I would agree. Yeah, don't buy the new hiking boots. Wear those older hiking boots that you've really broken in. It's different than like trail running tennis shoes where you want a fresh pair all the time. I tend to wear my oldest hiking boots, and yeah, it takes a lot of work for me. I have narrow feet to find the right boot. But your question was about safety. So my recommendations would be take a wilderness first aid course, or even so, a wilderness first responder course. When I used to be a backpacking guide, we were required to be wilderness first responders, and that even, came into play as I was working for the National Park Service, backpacking acoustical monitoring equipment into the backcountry. I used to work for a program called the Natural Sounds and Night Skies Division. So we would pack equipment into the wilderness. And so just, feeling like we could help ourselves or help our colleagues, knowing that we had some basic training and, we're prepared with, what we could do. And some of those things on the list, might be like carry a pencil and a notepad, like if you were to need to, leave a note or that kind of thing. In those situations, we also carried GPS devices, or I think in this instance, they were called spot devices. So if you needed to send a signal, it would just be like a message that's going to someone so they could receive that on the other end. And it would just be like, emergency with your pinpoint. And then other advice in general is just know the type of environment that you're hiking in. Is it high alpine? Is it desert? Like, what are the things you need to be concerned about depending on the different environments. So if you're in the desert and it's going to be extremely hot, do you have enough water? Do you have electrolytes? Do you have the right food? And then for me, I do not like to be cold and wet. So rain gear. And yes, rain gear in the desert, because like that's the time the hailstorm is going to hit you. So just having all the gear that you could possibly need for any type of weather, even if the weather forecast said it's not going to rain, like pack the opposite, like just be prepared.
Excellent tips, Ericka. Thank you. Sonya, how about you?
Yeah, so these are all good things. And you guys have covered quite a few of the ones I was going to say. I guess I'd add part of staying safe is knowing yourself. So something that might be completely safe for one person to do might not be for another. For example, I'm not a climber. I'm scared of heights and I have no climbing ability whatsoever. So even, you know, cliff sides or steep trails that, you know, would be a piece of cake for someone who's a hiker, it would look like a staircase to me. That could be scary. So if I'm alone, you know your own abilities. And if you aren't with someone who can help you, then, you know, just make sure you're not doing something that's going to put yourself in danger. I guess have a backup was one of my points. You guys have covered a lot of that. Part of that, I think maybe I could add, is don't rely on your cell phone for everything. Cell phones can do a lot. They can be your navigation, your communication, your flashlight. But if you have no backup and you lose your cell phone, you can get into trouble, especially if you're in the backcountry and alone. So try and have a backup. I guess one of the other components of have a contact that I would recommend is if something goes wrong, try to know who you can contact, especially if you're in a foreign country. You know, somebody steals your passport, who do you call? If something, you know, you get lost, can you call 911 where you are? Are you likely to have cell service? If you are, is that what you call, or is there another number? Like, try and be a little bit prepared if something goes wrong to know how you can respond to it. Because I think one of the worst things that can happen, especially if you're alone, is you panic. So you want to just try and be prepared and avoid that situation. And I think pretty much my other points you all have covered very nicely.
So paper maps, offline maps, maybe a satellite phone, maybe all useful things to bring with you on a long distance hike somewhere you're not familiar with, especially.
For sure.
Lindsay.
Yeah, these are all great tips. And I think a lot of it plays into recreate responsibly. So knowing the weather where you're going, you know, before you go, look at trail signage. Sometimes people will post about an animal that they've seen out on trail that you might not get from, you know, a website. So those are all, you know, great points. And I think too, to second Sonya's and Lisa's points about tell friends and family specific plans, I think that's really important. Kind of on the flip side of that, a lot of times on trail, one of the harmless questions I hear out there is, oh, so where are you camping tonight? And as a woman, that kind of freaks me out a little bit. And I know that for the most part, 99.9% of the time, it's coming from someone who's just curious and trying to make conversation. But when that question does come up, the answer that I have, even if I know exactly where I'm camping and I have a permit, you know, it's not a ranger I'm talking to, it's just someone. I usually say, well, you know, I'm gonna hike as far as my legs will take me. And it's something that comes off as fun, but doesn't give exact plans to that stranger who may or may not have whatever intentions in mind. So that's just something I've learned out there on trail. Another safety tip, I think, is don't be afraid to use your voice or be embarrassed to use your voice. And when I talk about that in the frame of reference of the backcountry, where it's maybe bear country, you know, when you're out there and if it's not a highly populated area, you don't know if there's a bear rummaging around, you know, around the trail somewhere. So I'm definitely regularly known to just be walking on trail and, you know, yell a good, hey, bear. And it might sound silly, but it gives wildlife the opportunity to know that you're around and give warning time for both you and potential animals. So as, you know, not to surprise them. And then the third, you know, safety tip I would give is use the gear that you have. I happen to hike with trekking poles and also an umbrella because you never know for the sun or the rain. But I like to use everything that's in my pack. So I think most of these women, you know, might agree that everything kind of might have a double use. But the trekking poles and the umbrella are great because they can also be an item if I do run into an animal out on trail, there's something that can be a barrier. I've run into some aggravated dogs, loose dogs out on trail, also venomous snakes. And if that arises, you pop the umbrella open and it's a barrier between that animal and myself. The snake doesn't want to be around me as much as I want to be around it. But, just walking by it, maybe with the umbrella open, if it does happen to strike, it might strike at that and not you. So I would just say everything that you have in your pack might have a double use to it. So use what you got in your pack.
Amazing. Excellent tips to add, Lindsay. We had a question from the audience. Do you double sock at all? Anyone? No? Single sock? And somebody else wanted to know where you get a satellite phone. I know there are several places online where you can rent one, but anything to add to that, ladies?
Most major outdoor recreation stores would have those types of things.
Yeah, and you can rent them. You don't have to buy one unless, you want to keep it for all of your adventures long term. But the technology does wear out too. So my next question is, what are your favorite trails to hike anywhere in the world? You can give me up to 3 of them. Lisa.
That's such a tough question because there's so many wonderful places to go hiking. So I think if I had to pick my number one closest to home, that would be, and when I say closest to home, it's I spent over 20 years of my life in New England, and the Franconia Ridge and the White Mountains. Doesn't matter where I go in the world, it's always a standout. I love being up in the Alpine zone. There's something so freeing. You just feel like you're on top of the world. And that's just a beautiful alpine walk that just really frees me from the rest of the world. The views are amazing, and it's very accessible in terms of mileage. It's not an easy day, but you can do it as a day hike. It's about 8 miles round trip, and you pass by waterfalls. And I gotta say, I've been a lot of places in the world, but I always go back to that one particular hike over and over again. It is bar none my favorite. So I'm going to leave it at that one. There are many others I've been in the world. It's probably for that moment it's where my favorite is, but that is my number one.
Amazing. Thank you, Lisa. Jennifer.
All right. Well, that sounds lovely. It's hard to narrow it down to 3. What came to mind for me initially was sort of one of the only really big long hikes I did was in Nepal years ago now. It was 98, and it was the Annapurna circuit. Sadly, I think it's changed quite a bit. However, I would recommend looking into it if that's the type of hike you're interested in. I loved it because it's the culture, it's the high mountains, beautiful, wonderful, kind people. So fabulous scenery. And it's that idea that it's, you've got your backpack with everything you need on, with you, and you're just wake up in the morning, have a simple meal, and you just walk all day, and you're up high, and you're through forests and ravines and walking across rickety little bridges. And, I just really, really enjoyed that hike. Of course, there's many wonderful hikes. In some respects, my favorite hike is the one I'm on. So yeah, they're all good. They all have something to say for themselves.
Beautiful. Thank you, Jennifer. Ericka.
So I see we have someone from Ohio on here. So this wasn't going to be my answer, but then it just popped in my mind because I'm from Southern Ohio. So Wayne National Forest, Old Man's Cave, and Hocking Hills State Park. So that's all the same region there. So Southern Ohio is actually quite spectacular. And yeah, and Old Man's Cave, it's just really a nice, it is a touristy area to visit, but it's just spectacular to see the waterfalls. And I remember being there as a very small child and getting to splash around in the pools of water beneath the waterfall. And I went back last year, actually, or 2 years ago, it's pre-COVID, with my sorority sisters, and we did the same hike. And I saw these small children playing in the water and splashing beneath these waterfalls, and they were still spectacular as an adult. And so that's kind of a surprising answer that I would say, but yeah, Southern Ohio, Wayne National Forest is a place for your bucket list. And there's a lot of cabins and, you know, just kind of that cozy feel of going back home for me. And the other one that I was going to mention is, you know, since I moved out west, I love the Red Rock deserts. So Kolob Canyons in Zion National Park is one that Amanda, you put on the webpage in terms of the link that folks can read about different places to visit. And that is a wilderness area on Laverkin Creek and along the, you know, the Virgin River, a tributary there. And so it's just spectacular red rocks, you know, all formed by the water that shaped the landscape. And that's the place that I've gone back to 2, 3, maybe 4 times on these solo backpacking trips ever since 2003 when I moved to Utah to be a backpacking guide. And it's just like a place that's close to my heart. And it really is a wilderness experience because it's, you know, it's a reservation is required to get your backcountry permit. And so you're not going to see a lot of people. And it's also a fairly mellow hike. So definitely one that I would recommend. And it's away from the main canyon in Zion. So you kind of have to drive quite a ways around to get to this portion of the park. So love that area. Brings me happy memories.
Amazing. So all of our ladies who are looking for slow and steady, there's one for you. Sonya.
Well, I'd say I have to agree with Jennifer, I think, who said you've got to love the trail you're on. I'm currently in year 2 of hiking the Great Trail. And I think it's a fantastic trail to hike because it offers so many different experiences. So parts of it are footpaths that are kind of wildernessy, like the East Coast Trail in Newfoundland that goes right along the coast of the Avalon Peninsula. There's the Fundy footpath. It's one of the hardest hikes in Canada. It's gorgeous wilderness trail. There's the Cask Isles Trail in Ontario on the northern shore of Lake Superior. But then there's also sections of it that are rail trail, and they're, you know, you can do great cycling vacations on them. I mean, we hike them, but the Confederation Trail in Prince Edward Island, for example, is an amazing place. You can cycle it or you can walk. There's bed and breakfasts along it, so you can kind of enjoy local food. There's a lot of cideries and wineries on the island. Like it's a great place just for an easier sort of hike. It's really flat. It's incredibly well maintained. The Celtic Shores Coastline Trail in Cape Breton Island is another trail that can be hiked or bicycled. And it's, you know, really flat. It's got gorgeous scenery, Celtic communities along the way, these fishing harbors, great views. I mean, this year we're going to head out into the prairies, so it's a completely different landscape, grasslands. When we get out west, we're going to go through the Rocky Mountains. I mean, the Great Trail also has some gorgeous sections that are in the city. It goes to all of Canada's capital cities. And so that's not something you often think about with hiking, but especially for people who have difficulties with uneven terrain or disabilities where they can't really get into the backcountry. There's sections through a lot of our cities. Stanley Park is a really nice one. You feel like you're in the wilderness, but you're actually on a paved bike trail that's pretty much in the middle of Vancouver. There's a waterfront trail in Toronto that's the same way. It's fairly accessible, but it has gorgeous views. It's right on the lakefront. So maybe I'm biased because I'm in the middle of hiking this, but I think just the range of possibilities makes it a really nice trail. And I mean, Canada is a great place to hike. The generosity and the kindness of people have gotten us as far as we've gotten so far. So it's amazing, the experiences we've had with people up until this point. So I would highly recommend that. I guess another one of my top trails would be any of the Caminos. It's a completely different experience. But I guess my sort of long distance hiking began there on the Camino Frances, which goes across Spain. And that kind of hike is a very social hike. You meet people from all over the world. You can experience a different culture. You also get to visit sort of lots of cathedrals and older architectural things. It's a wonderful experience. For me, it's what set me on the path to walking across Canada. So I would also recommend that to anyone who's looking for trails. Any of the Caminos in Europe are great experiences.
Amazing. Thank you, Sonya. Lindsay.
Yeah, well, in the spirit of through hiking or long distance hiking, I think one of my favorites is the Oregon Desert Trail. And that goes through, it kind of winds itself through Eastern Oregon. And not many people, or I didn't realize that Oregon, a large part of it is high desert. I thought it was all on the west side of the Cascades, which is wet and fern and rainforest like. But the Oregon Desert Trail goes to the amazing desert. And especially if you're going to pinpoint one area, I would say the Oahe Canyon. It's incredibly gorgeous, and some people refer to it as the Little Grand Canyon. And then as a second, I would follow up with what Lisa was saying and say the Presidential Traverse. The White Mountains are a special place in my heart, and the Presidential Traverse is incredible if you're doing it as a one long day hike, or you can break it up into multiple days. Being up above tree line out there is incredible. If you can do it in the fall and see the colors, you get bonus points for that as well. And then a third hike, I would say any hike that's close to home. So for me, that hike is always changing. But what I love about a hike that's close to home is it's quick to get to, but I can do it over and over again. So I can see it when it's dark outside, when it's light outside, when the light is just right, when it's rainy, at all 4 seasons. I can see that a hike that's close to home. And for me, that's a hike that continually gives, because some of these are once in a lifetime opportunity to get a permit and go to this place. But even if it's a hike that's close to home, that's maybe relatively short or goes through maybe not the most picturesque scenery, it's something, and it's an evolution that I get to experience with the land. So I get to understand the sights and the smells and the animals and learn all about the context of which I'm living in. So I would say a great hike is one that's close to home.
Thank you. And Sonya, we had a question come in from the audience, and I'm not sure if you know if all sections of the Great Trail are open this summer and fall. I know you can check the website for each trail along the Great Trail, but.
As far as I know, most of them are open, but I would definitely check. There are some restrictions on travel between provinces, and I think especially some sections that go through the Indigenous communities may have additional restrictions. But I believe most of it is open and hikeable this summer and fall, at least we're hoping. So
my next question, ladies, is how can somebody prepare their body for a hiking trip, both before the trip and in between big hikes, so they can stay fit and limber for hiking? Lisa.
So I've thought a little bit about this. I think the obvious answers are do things that are going to keep you aerobically fit. A lot of people will run or they'll bike, or they'll just walk around their neighborhood or their parks. My advice though is look at the mileage that you want to do on the trail and make sure you're at least doing that amount of mileage, if not a little bit more, when you are trying to get in shape. The other piece of it is if you're hiking something that's vertical, even if you live in total flatlands, try to do stuff that's a little bit vertical, whether it's climbing stairs or being on an elliptical or something that makes you use your vertical muscles, meaning your hamstrings and your quads. I think a lot of us tend to just do things on the flats and straight ahead exercises and or sports, and hiking also demands a bit of balance and coordination. And so as much as you can work that in and that vertical element, you'll be golden.
Perfect. Thank you. Jennifer.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, I think there's two pieces for me. One is sort of there's no substitute for practice. So it's that idea of just get out, just do it. Every bit counts. Keep moving through all seasons. So, don't just sort of hike and bike in the summer and come winter, well, we're just going to wait till, the snow is gone and we'll start up again. So it's that maintaining your level of fitness, I think. I think to add to what Lisa said, I'm personally a big fan of sort of cross training too. So there's that piece of practicing what you're actually going to be doing, which is hiking and walking. But also everything else helps too, right? So if it's biking, mountain biking, swimming, weightlifting, all of those pieces, I think yoga, all of that's important, right? So it's kind of having a holistic approach, I think, to fitness. But I really think it's also just really critical to keep moving. Always keep yourself busy and exercising.
Beautiful. Thank you. Ericka.
Yeah, I would just echo what everyone else has already said. And yeah, know your own body, do the exercises that you enjoy, and cross training, I think, can also be helpful. Yeah, if you want to mix up, depending on what your activities are, like running with biking with whatever. But I would also say, like, try not to be intimidated if you're feeling like, oh my goodness, this is just overwhelming. Pick a hike. Like if you're worried about your body not holding up over the distance, pick a hike that's like 2 miles in. You can do a 2-mile backpacking trip. There's nothing out there saying you have to do some, really long distance trail. If it's new to you or just something you want to try, yeah, you could do a short hike. And I sort of joke about this, but I'm all about fairness. So when I met my husband, I was like, 30% of my body weight is a lot less than 30% of your body weight. Here's your fair portion of the things that you need to carry. So I'm sort of joking, but you really can, like, hike with friends and divide up the weight in a way that makes everyone comfortable. And the fact is, when hiking with him, he likes to really struggle, and I like to slow him down. So yeah, put a few extra rocks in his pack. So just sort of joking, I'll let us go on to the next person.
Thank you. Sonya.
Yeah, I think these are all good points. I guess I'd say start slow. Like if you aren't doing a lot of hiking and you're trying to prepare for a longer distance hike, do shorter hikes and slowly build up your distance. And as you're getting closer to the time you're leaving, start carrying more weight. And I would recommend trying to do, a decent chunk, like maybe a 10-kilometer hike or something with your full pack before you actually set out, just to make sure that you can actually carry it without keeling over. It's easier to dump stuff when you're still at home than when you're on the trail. And I guess another thing that might help, it depends how much time you have to devote to getting ready to your hike, but maybe joining a local hiking group or running group or something during the year can help you stay motivated to sort of keep regularly getting out and going for hikes. Sometimes in the winter, especially, it can be hard to sort of get the motivation to keep hiking, keep training. So maybe joining a local group in your neighborhood might be a way to sort of make it a social, fun thing and keep fit.
Amazing. Thank you. Lindsay.
Yeah, just a continuation of what everyone said here. But I would stress to practice with the weight. If you are going to have a pack, practice with the weight of the pack, and you don't have to be there day one, but work up to that weight. Even if you're just going on a day hike and you're going to be carrying a pack that's not, doesn't have a lot in it, or even just like a fanny pack, a lot of those packs will wear on your body in certain ways. So, and you might not realize that. So after 5 miles or 2 miles or 5 miles, you might start to get wear points on your body from how it's moving on your body. So I would say, even if you don't have a heavy pack, still wear the gear you're going to wear on your hike, even when you're just walking around the neighborhood. And if you are going to pack a backpack full of weight, some people want to just say, okay, well, I'll just throw some bottles of water in there and some really heavy objects. But on trail, you're going to pack your backpack in a very specific way to distribute the weight correctly. And so sometimes you're doing yourself a disservice if you're just throwing heavy weights all over the place, because it's not going to be similar to how it's going to be on trail. And then the other thing too is I would always say prepare your ankles. Ankle fatigue is something that always happens to me on trail the more miles I hike. And so there's always a rock and a root just waiting to jump up and either trip you or try to sprain your ankle. So one of the things I really like to practice before a hike is just building up my ankle strength. And even if you're just walking around the streets, I try to find curbs and maybe a curb that's angled and practice walking on it and different angles. And so that can also give me some ankle strength to help me when I'm out on trail. I always do pay attention. It's usually a mile or a mile and a half from either the trailhead or camp that I'm thinking about the burger I'm going to eat or how I'm going to set up my tent. And my mind slips from being focused on the trail. So I know that a mile and a half to camp is when I'm most likely to sprain my ankle. So really, I say tired legs breed trouble. And so it's really in that last mile and a half that I focus in and I say, I'll be at camp. And when I'm there, I can do all the things, all the camp chores I need to do. But for now, I need to focus on walking until I get there.
Amazing. So we had a couple questions come in from the audience during that. Somebody asked how many pounds in an average pack? And I know there's a various range, but anybody want to answer that one? Lisa.
So I think it's easier to talk about percentage of weight rather than straight weight. So the rule of thumb is to never carry much more than about 25%, maybe 30% of your body weight. So if you use that as a benchmark, and that goes for backpacking trip, that you'll be in that sweet spot, the average fitness. Obviously day packs are lighter, but and if you're trekking, the one thing to keep in mind, usually there's a weight limit from what you can put on it depends on if it's a porter or a mule or whatever is carrying the bulk of the gear, but keep your personal pack to like somewhere between 20 to 25 pounds max. I'm a photographer and I have to really keep that in mind because I could carry a very heavy pack just with my camera gear, but it's really important for your fatigue factor and just your ability to keep, like Lindsay was saying, your ankles from turning an ankle, or just your overall enjoyment on the trail and how your pack is weighing on you. So go with that maximum of 25 to 30% of your body weight for a big pack.
Amazing. Thank you. Another question was some considerations for choosing the right hiking boots for you. Anybody want to take that one?
Well, I can do that one too, I guess.
Cool.
Okay, so full disclosure, I'm an ambassador for LOA. So I spent a lot of time testing hiking boots and looking at hiking boots. And so take a look at the lining of the boot and take a look at the overall construction of the sole of the boot. Every boot is a little bit different. There's a lot of emphasis right now on going super lightweight, but what you give up if you go for an ultra lightweight footwear is your feet will get a little more pounded by rock and uneven parts of the terrain. So just really make sure that the sole of the boot is both durable with good traction, but also is going to protect your foot from below. And then make sure that upper part is comfortable. A lot of people end up in a boot that's too small, and then they lose their toenails or they're more susceptible to blisters. So proper fit. The last piece of that is lace, how you lace your boot. I have seen so many different ways that people lace their boots, and sometimes to their detriment. So just be sure you really know that boot and how the lace system works so that it holds your foot properly and it's not moving around in that boot.
Excellent.
One thing I would add too, because Lisa's comments are spot on, and I'm on the other spectrum where I usually hike in a trail runner for that lightweight quality, but I wouldn't recommend that for anyone. Or for everyone, I should say. So look and see if the shoe might have a rock plate in it. So that's going to help protect the bottom of your feet. The other thing I might recommend is when you go to the store, maybe go to the store after you've done a hike or you've been on your feet, because then they're going to be more swollen. Versus if you wake up first thing in the morning and go try on boots, your size might be much smaller, when you get fitted in the store. But if you go later in the day on a hot day when your feet are swollen, when you're mimicking, hiking conditions, then you might go with a little bit bigger size, and then that's going to help you out on trail to mimic again those trail conditions.
Amazing. Now I'm going to open it up to questions from the audience. So if you do have a question for any of our panelists, put it in the chat. But I'm going to ask one. Where's one place you haven't hiked that's on your list for when we can travel and get out there again? Lisa.
Have to unmute myself. So my next hike is hopefully going to be in Patagonia. I have spent some time in the Andes, but I've never been that far south, and that's a bucket list location for me. I'd love to do the W Trek. So I'm hoping that that'll open up soon, and that'll be where I go.
Amazing. Jennifer.
Yeah, well, I think it's partly a bit of where I'm at in life. So I have two, young kids and I work full time. So what I would love to do when my opportunity opens up a little bit more would be, I would love to do the Great Trail. I would love to do some of these longer through hikes. All the ones Lindsay talked about at the beginning, they're all on my bucket list. I probably won't get to them all in life, but maybe one or two. However, this summer in where I live in Jasper National Park, I've got a route called the Six Pass route. So you go over 6 mountain passes, and it's a random camp in the park, and so that's going to get me into some territory that I haven't explored in the national park, and get up high, and it should be good. So that's coming up imminently. I look forward to that.
Amazing. Ericka.
So I was gonna say, actually, the Colorado Trail, sections of the Colorado Trail up near Buena Vista, Colorado, and Salida, Colorado. So that's on my list. And Lindsay and I actually met through this. We both work for the Park Service in Colorado. So maybe she and I can do a hike. And recently checked out Mount Princeton Hot Springs, which is close by there. And just a spectacular way to relax if you are doing a long distance hike on the Colorado Trail. It goes right past the hot springs. So just thinking, wow, that would be really lovely to end a segment of a hike at some very relaxing hot springs and a river. That just sounds really pleasant. And yes, I've done the W trek in Patagonia. I highly recommend Torres del Paine in Patagonia.
Amazing.
I'll call you.
Sonya, how about you?
There are so many. I guess I'll say the Shikoku Trail in Japan, I would love to do. I think the scenery looks beautiful. I think it'd be a completely different experience. And also the trek from Canterbury to Rome, I would love to do. It's another Camino, but really anywhere.
Amazing. Lindsay.
Yeah, so many places. Patagonia is definitely on the list. I'd love to do the Te Aurora in New Zealand at some point. It's more of a hut to hut, or part of it can be hut to hut. Also, too, some of these long distance through hikes in the United States, they do continue on up into Canada. So I'd love to finish the trail complete and head up there and just see what that what that's all about. One for the United States, I think the Hayduke Trail is on the list as well. So it's another route finding long distance hike. So many good places though.
Any other questions from the audience? Let's see, whoops. Nope, just recommendations. All right. Well, I'd like to thank Lisa, Jennifer, Ericka, Sonya, and Lindsay for joining me on tonight's hiking-themed episode of Solo Travel Wisdom. I want to thank you for sharing your stories, your experience, and yourselves with us for the past hour. To our viewers, thank you as always for tuning in and choosing to spend your time with us. I'm walking away from this hour feeling pretty inspired to get out there on the trails, and I hope you are as well. If you want even more inspiration, you can join publisher Carolyn Ray and women's self-defense expert Lorna Selig for an interactive session on solo travel safety. That's happening on April 7th at 4 p.m. Eastern. You can join me on Tuesday, April 27th at 8 p.m. Eastern for a special episode of Solo Travel Wisdom with a packing expert named Ann McAlpin, who's appeared on Oprah, The View, and other broadcast outlets with her tips. Until next month, this has been Solo Travel Wisdom by JourneyWoman with your host, Amanda Burgess. Good night, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.